Concealed room deep inside Mount Rushmore has one odd purpose. Mount Rushmore may be one of the most iconic monuments in the United States of America, but it's also recognizable all over the world. In addition to paying tribute to some of the nation's most seminal leaders, the four faces in stone are an impressive work of construction all on their own. But what many might not know about this famous masterpiece is that one man fought to hide something inside it. Wanting to create a secret room deep within the bowels of the rock facade, he defied orders in an attempt to see his vision through. Mount Rushmore might not ever have even made it into fruition had it not been for one especially contentious century-old sibling rivalry. It was the fierce competition that led to the mountain's most secret feature. Gutzon Borglum, the man who would go on to create the iconic stone monument, had a little brother who was known for his sculpting talents. Of course, Borglum decided he needed to become even better at the craft. Borglum got his big break when he made a bust of Lincoln that got America's attention. It was at this point that he was commissioned for a much larger project that would end up being Mount Rushmore. Government officials in South Dakota believed their Black Hills would be the perfect location for a monument to the country. Not to mention, it would bring in a little tourist income, which was badly needed. So, Borglum set about choosing the four presidents he considered best representative of the nation's values. In the end, he settled on Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. In 1927, he was ready to work. But this project wasn't cheap. The government did agree to pay for it, but it ended up costing nearly $1 million. In today's money, that amounts to about $15 million. With a crew of 30, Borglum started chipping away. These 30 men were tasked with the arduous job of blasting the solid rock with dynamite, carving away at its stony facade. Definitely not easy work. As they focused on the details of each presidential face, Borglum's mind was elsewhere. While most people involved in the construction were most invested in worries about the sculptures themselves, Borglum had much more secretive plans in mind. The carved stone faces were only the beginning of his magnum opus. This is because he secretly desired to build a special hidden room, squirreled away behind Abraham Lincoln's head. This place would include important documents, such as the Declaration of Independence and other plaques explaining the importance of the project, the ultimate artistic statement. Finally, in 1938, an entire decade after construction had first begun, builders began blasting away at the top of the statue, creating the room that Borglum hoped to become his so-called Hall of Records. In Borglum's vision, this room would be no easy feat for the everyday person to access. Visiting the hall would require climbing an 800-foot staircase, after which tourists would enter beneath a large golden eagle with an impressively large wingspan of 38 feet. Of course, the government still wasn't very fond of this idea, so officials refused to finance it. A South Dakota state senator stepped in, offering relief workers to aid in the process, but even this wouldn't turn out as planned. Borglum didn't like the idea of relief workers being employed because this would mean that, unlike the government financing, none of the funds would go straight into the pocket of the architect himself. Tragically, Gutzon Borglum died in March of 1941 and never lived to see the day that his cherished Hall of Records would be completed. This was far from the end of the story for Borglum's pet project, though. Only mere months after Borglum's sudden passing, in October of 1941, Mount Rushmore was finally completed, sans the Hall of Records. That is, until a certain group petitioned to make Borglum's dying wish see the light of day. Yes, for years after his passing, Borglum's entire family fought tirelessly to have his passion project included in the iconic, breathtaking work he'd created. Unfortunately, for a long time their efforts remained fruitless. Then, finally, in 1998, the state gave the permission to enter the half-finished Hall of Records. The family placed plaques inside the dwelling. These included inscriptions describing the work done on the mountain, as well as its significance to Borglum and the nation itself. One plaque included a quote from Borglum. "Hence, let us place there, as close to the heaven as we can, the words of our leaders, to show posterity what manner of men they were. Then breathe a prayer, that these records will endure until the wind and rain alone shall wear them away." While it's wonderful that Bulgram finally received his dying wish and that his family had the sentimental closure of placing the plaques inside, the Hall of Records remains closed to the public to this day. Still, a group of visitors recently got a great deal more than they bargained for. In fact, they saw something shockingly out of place when they looked up at the mountain. Hard as it was to believe, there was a trespasser making her way up the monument, and this woman wasn't walking a few feet off the trail either. She was nearing a dangerous point of no return. This woman was starting to scale the stone steps, like she was a South Dakota spider woman. Somehow, she made it onto the face of the monument without anyone knowing. In fact, she'd climbed over the safety railing and ignored multiple no trespassing signs designed to deter even the most confused tourist. Once she was on the rock face, observers noticed something even more shocking. This climber was scaling the monument without a safety rope or harness. And perhaps, even more bizarrely, she was climbing into the space between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson without any shoes. Unsurprisingly, the authorities reacted quickly to the intruder. When a park ranger approached the slope, intending to bring the woman back to safety, however, their interaction was far from usual. When the ranger asked the woman to come down, she reportedly asked if authorities wanted her to come down quickly or slowly. She kept scaling the mountain during their conversation, however. She kept climbing on the faces, reaching roughly 3/4 of the way up the 60-foot tall presidents. At that point, authorities decided that they'd had enough of this stunt. They spoke to the woman again, and she agreed to come down from the monument. She was identified as Alexandria Incontro, who was visiting the tourist attraction with her family from Nebraska. Once back on solid ground, Incontro was searched, handcuffed, and arrested. She was then taken to a waiting ambulance to make sure that she was healthy enough to be taken to jail. Medics found that Incontro had some scrapes from scaling the rock pile at the base of the monument. She also had minor injuries from her barefoot climb. She declined further treatment and was taken to Pennington County Jail. She was charged with multiple crimes, but most of them were dropped before Incontro appeared in federal court. She ultimately pleaded guilty to climbing Mount Rushmore and was fined $1,000. Weirdly, she wasn't the only unauthorized explorer in recent years. In 1970s, members of the American Indian movement planned to scale and occupy the monument. Greenpeace also tried and failed to hang a banner shaped like a gas mask on George Washington in 1987. In 2018, 19-year-old Zachary Shosow, who was in the area for a Christian music festival, was nabbed by park rangers on the rocks below the mountain. He, too, had a memorable exchange with authorities. When the rangers approached, he reportedly said, "I'm sorry, dude. I was just doing it for the fun." And while that's a polite apology, it didn't stop him from getting arrested and fined. Greenpeace made a return trip up Mount Rushmore in 2009. Their climb, however, was designed to make a statement, which earned them a much stiffer punishment when authorities eventually intervened. 12 activists scaled the back of the mountain and rappelled down the president's faces. They also unfurled a large banner, asking then-President Barack Obama to stop global warming. It hung for about an hour before being removed. 11 of the 12 activists were charged with trespassing and climbing Mount Rushmore. They were all fined and sentenced to community service, while one member spent 2 days in jail. Trouble keeps happening at tourist attractions around the world.